Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. The 7 Deadly Economic Sins. The 7 deadly sins of Christianity are serious capital sins because they spawn sinful behavior in general. The 7 economic sins of economic policy destroy capital, undermine wage rates, and the standard of living. They actually kill people via poverty, malnutrition, suicide, and the like. 3/4 of Americans now do not think the economy is in good shape, and optimism for the future is fading fast. Various economic problems seem to be getting worse by the day. The pundits do not agree, and the people are at each other's throats. The usual solutions to each individual problem is more government spending when the government is broke, can't pay its bills, and is regularly adding trillions to the national debt. It can all be overwhelming. The good news is that all 7 problems emanate from the same source. The cause is monetary inflation, which is exogenous and removable from society. It's not a natural and necessary element of society. Only the Austrian School of Economics has a comprehensive analysis that ties all this together with cause and effect analysis. In mainstream economics, the problems are siloed into compartments, described statistically, and the solutions usually call for a greater quantity and new variety of the same failed treatments. Keynesians, monetarists, and modern monetary theorists all support monetary inflation in some form, and of course, politicians and the political elites benefit from inflation. Austrian economists analyze the economy theoretically and deductively rather than the mainstream's mathematical and statistical approaches. Austrians seek to understand cause and effect relationships down to the level of the individual to understand social order and disorder established by economic laws based on individual incentives. Other economists study each problem separately to calculate aggregate numbers that hide the problem and don't provide a resolution. Higher prices. Of the 7 major problems, the one that is the easiest to isolate and for which there is general agreement across party lines is the impact of higher prices on family budgets and small businesses. Everyone from President Donald Trump to New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani know that affordability is the number one issue with Americans. This problem is distressing when you have to stop buying something altogether just to make ends meet or to meet a payroll. Higher prices, or inflation, is caused by the government's Federal Reserve printing money. And this is really one of the oldest known teaching of economics, dating back 500 years. However, in recent decades, the definition of inflation has been changed from money printing to increasing prices. This change in definition covers up the true cause of higher prices and allows the blame to be shifted onto things like COVID or the Russians or greedy corporations. Here, economists, politicians, and government employees of all sorts are all doing the bidding of the political elites who grow ever richer from this process. Austrian economists stick with the age-old causal definition of inflation: too much money chasing too few goods. Inequality. Well, economic inequality is an expanding problem. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The middle class is falling further behind and shrinking fast. The social belief that the next generation will do better than the last generation is fading quickly. The expanding gap between rich and poor is or should be a priority, but it's a vexing issue. Most people correctly recognize that the problem will not be solved by spending more on discrimination policy, opportunity, or more education spending. Austrians see this second issue as clearly related to the first issue. The biggest winners get the new money before prices ever begin to increase. The biggest losers only get higher prices. The mechanism the Federal Reserve uses to increase the supply of money reduces the interest rate by making more money available for the banks to lend, printed up out of thin air. So the banks get their raw material at a discount, and the biggest borrower, the federal government, is the biggest winner. The lower interest rate also raises asset prices. Stocks, bonds, and real estate, as we all know, all go up when interest rates go down. Wage rate increases only come at the end of the inflationary process, lagging behind the prices of everything else. Money printing inflation helps the rich and harms the working class. The boom-bust cycle. Now, inflation is not a stable, predictable process, but it's one that politicians would like to control to ensure their reelection. Lowering interest rates stimulates debt accumulation, business investment, real estate construction, consumer durables, but it's a drag on individual savings. It creates more spending and excitement in the short run, but it creates bad decisions and more debt in the longer run. As the new money circulates through the economy, costs and prices increase, and inflation-adjusted incomes decline. The investment plans, which once looked so promising, are now disappointing, and many of them fail, leading to widespread unemployment and bankruptcy. Most other economists are completely befuddled by recessions, but for Austrian economists, it's an expected result of manipulating the money supply. Big government. Nothing is more frustrating than the growth of government relative to the population or even the size of the overall economy. A major cause is money printing. Citizens vote against taxes and sometimes even revolt against taxes. And bond markets recoil against wasteful government spending sprees and debt when rates increase on a gold monetary system. Unbacked paper money printing frees the state to spend without opposition. Citizens get new benefits and new services without having to pay any kind of higher price. So they want more government spending. Support for new government programs falls by half when voters know the price they will have to pay in order to receive a government benefit. And not only does government provision of benefits cost much more than competitive market provision, but the lack of competition means that costs tend to increase faster than goods in the market and services in the economy. Money printing substitutes for tax money and greases the wheels of government spending. The national debt. The ability to print money at no cost also leads to increases in the national debt. This occurs through three different channels, the combination of which has led to increasing budget deficits, a ballooning national debt, and now interest payments on the national debt are a top item in the government's budget. Most economists applaud the government's ability to use this massive borrowing to stimulate the economy and address social ills. The first channel is the notion of borrowing to address social issues now to stimulate the economy through a multiplier process, all before the costs go up, higher prices, when the economy returns to trend growth. Now, this is the old Keynesian economics folklore that you can use printing and debt during a recession to get more than you have to pay for. This is just more propaganda than economics, really, because this dark magic rarely works. The second channel does work, however. Here, the U.S. government receives a lower interest rate than everybody else because its debt is backed up with the power to print money to pay off maturing debts. The U.S. government's ability to pay a lower interest rate because of its ability to pay is ultimately backed by the printing press. The third channel is not often discussed in public, but it's the most potent economic force in both politics and the economics profession. Here, the argument is that government borrowing and a large national debt is a good deal for citizens because the debt can be paid off in inflation-depreciated dollars. And that's an open admission that inflation is a policy that undermines citizens and the people who lend money to the government. And economists are phobic about even the possibility of deflation, that is, prices falling in general, because that means paying back the national debt with more valuable dollars. And of course, that would ruin the whole Keynesian game that they want to play. And the historical evidence suggests that deflation is actually good for the economy and the general standard of living. International conflict. Big government and various socializing programs reduce our standard of living directly and indirectly. They insidiously reduce capital investment, which reduces wage rate growth. As the economic drag of government starts showing up in our pocketbooks, politicians will often latch on to the idea of a beggar thy neighbor policy. And with this policy, the government prints money to intentionally drive down the value of its currency, the US dollar. Now, this harebrained idea holds that devaluing the dollar will make our exports less expensive to foreigners, spur export sales, and increase jobs. Of course, the policy fails to recognize that it simultaneously makes our goods and foreign goods more expensive for Americans and raises our overall cost of living. Now, the U.S. used this policy on a colossal scale during the Bretton Woods system after World War II until going off the gold standard roughly in 1971. And it completely decimated our once dominant manufacturing sector. The same beggar thy neighbor policy is a major reason for tension between the U.S. and China. It's a major impetus to tariff protectionism, trade wars, and as the great Ludwig von Mises showed, can end in horrific military conflict. Austrian economists see the gold standard as putting nations on the same independent monetary system where there is no conflict. Moral decay. I list moral decay here last, not because I think it's the least important issue facing society. I certainly do not think that that is true. Rather, it is because I don't feel especially adequate as an economist to judge these issues. However, I do offer up this piece of analysis for your judgment. And here I'm looking past the issues of the state passing out benefits to rich and poor alike, or that monetary inflation, like counterfeiting, is a deeply fraudulent activity carried on in the name of our government. I'm sticking with the impact of money printing, reducing interest rates, and causing a nation's currency to be debased or devalued over time. This hampers the ability of the individual to save, to build, and to proliferate. It provides a systemic incentive to spend on consumption and to go into debt. This pattern easily becomes a habit, and the general habit becomes a social norm. Everything denominated in dollars erodes beneath our feet like quicksand. Austrian economists refer to this issue as time preference. People with low time preference can control their urges to consume. They can delay satisfaction. They are better planners and think more broadly about their impact on the future and their reputation with others. People with high time preference are more compelled to consume and are irritated by postponements of their satisfaction. They live for the moment and are generally unconcerned by considerations of the future. Some even revel in the self-destruction of their own character and reputation. Strictly speaking, this preference relates to economic decisions, but it doesn't take a brain surgeon to see that this devil-may-care attitude has implications for moral decisions as well. Money printing is a central force for both economic and hence moral decay. Austrian school economists have exposed the cause of the 7 deadly economic sins. Government inflation of the money supply. The inflation policy is conducted by the government's central bank, the Federal Reserve, in Washington, D.C. Both political parties are complicit in this deception with the political elites. The Federal Reserve has bought off much of the economics profession so that officially we neither know the cause or the solution to our economic problems, such as higher prices, the business cycle, and the cause of economic inequality. Austrians have something different to offer. Ludwig von Mises famously noted that the semantic deception of Marxism starts with redefining the word, and that, quote, those who pretend to fight inflation are in fact only fighting what is the inevitable consequence of inflation, rising prices. Their ventures are doomed to failure because they do not attack the root of evil.